On October 17, 1997, a quiet city in the interior of Oregon, Oakage, was forever changed by an anonymous connection received by Sheriff Thomas Wilkins. The complaint, alleging strange sounds from an isolated property, was made by a neighbor who preferred not to identify himself. The property belonged to the Blackwood family, established in that mountainous region since the mid-19th century. "Something is wrong in that barn," said the recording of the call, preserved in the Lane County Police Archives. "I have never seen anyone come in or out, but at night sometimes I hear shouts. They are not animals." What the authorities found on the Blackwood farm, located approximately 40 kilometers from Oakage Center, exceeded any expectation. Hidden by dense vegetation and surrounded by a barbed wire fence of almost 3 meters in height, stood a faded red barn. It appeared common at a distance, but its only entrance was sealed with several locks, chains, and padlocks. When the officers broke down the door, the odor was the first thing that hit them, a mixture of urine, feces, and something indefinable that one of the police would later describe as the smell of the very absence of humanity. Inside, partially illuminated by cracks in the roof, they found 7 women, their ages ranging from 12 to 42, living in conditions the police report would classify as incompatible with any standard of human dignity. "I swoo," Dr. Michael Stevenson, a coroner who accompanied the operation, told the Portland Herald. "In 27 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like that." Those women had physical characteristics that immediately suggested severe consanguinity and prolonged facial malformations, extra fingers, obvious vision problems. But the eyes were the most disturbing feature. Everyone had exactly the same empty look. A generational experiment of family endogamy, extending for at least 5 generations, was what subsequent investigations would reveal the barn had housed, not only victims. Genetic records collected at the University of Oregon would confirm these were possibly the most consanguineous women ever documented in modern United States history. The property officially belonged to Jeremiah Blackwood, then 68, the patriarch of a family that had progressively isolated itself from the community over decades. What started as simple social removal would eventually become one of the most disturbing stories of abuse, isolation, and intentional genetic manipulation ever documented. A deliberate intention to create a pure lineage, as they called it, was clearly demonstrated by detailed diaries, explained Dr. Eliza Montgomery, the forensic geneticist in charge of the case. "This was not a case of ignorance or accident," she stated. "There were notes on specific physical characteristics and attempts to select traits like eye color and bone structure through planned crossings between close relatives." The Blackwood family history goes back to the Great Depression when Elijah Blackwood, Jeremiah's grandfather, acquired the 200-acre property in 1931 for a fraction of its value. Original Lane County records show that Elijah, a former miner who lost everything in the economic collapse, paid only $175 for the land, a value considered extremely low even in that epoch. The reason for the price, according to local historical archives, was the property's sinister reputation. This context of paranoia and isolation was where Harold Blackwood, the son of Elijah and father of Jeremiah, was raised. Documents found on the property during the 1997 investigation reveal that Harold married his own second cousin, Rebecca, who lived in Idaho. Medical records recovered indicate Rebecca gave birth to 6 children between 1953 and 1962, all at home without professional medical assistance. Of these, only 3 survived beyond childhood. When Harold died in 1978, victim of a tractor accident, Jeremiah, then 22, took control of the property and family. Under Jeremiah's leadership, the family's isolation intensified. While his father had maintained minimal contact with the city for essential purchases, Jeremiah reduced these interactions to practically zero. The most disturbing revelation, as shown by the diaries seized in 1997, was the transition from simple social isolation to a deliberate project of genetic purification. Jeremiah, who had apparently developed a self-taught interest in genetics through books found on the property, began to systematically document family physical characteristics and plan unions between relatives. "The outside world corrupts the blood," he wrote in a 1985 entry. "Each generation that remains pure strengthens what we are." The Red Barn, built in 1980 according to property records, was projected from the beginning not as an agricultural structure, but as a lockdown space. Detailed hand-drawn plans by Jeremiah showed a 2-story building with internal partitions, a rudimentary water system, and, more disturbingly, an elaborate lock system that could only be opened from the outside. The 7 women rescued in 1997 lived in conditions police reports described as medieval. The barn windows had been boarded up, allowing only minimal light entry. This, according to the psychologists who evaluated the victims, was a calculated form of temporal disorientation. The women had only a vague notion of the passage of days. The case became even more disturbing when Sarah, the oldest of the women rescued, then 42, began talking to investigators. Sarah, identified as Jeremiah's biological daughter with his own sister, Mary, had been the first confined to the barn at age 15. "Daddy said we were special, that our blood was purer than that of any family in America," Sarah said in a recorded statement now preserved in the FBI archives. According to the diaries and Sarah's testimony, the system worked methodically. Women, as soon as they reached puberty, were transferred to the barn. There they were visited regularly by Jeremiah or Joseph in a rotation system documented in notebooks. These visits resulted in frequent pregnancies, though many ended in miscarriages or stillborns. The weak babies did not survive, and this was considered natural, even desirable, explained Dr. Robert Peterson, the forensic psychiatrist on the case. When the 7 women were finally examined at the University of Oregon Medical Center, doctors documented the extensive physical consequences of generations of endogamy. DNA tests performed with state-of-the-art technology confirmed what the physical symptoms suggested. The endogamy coefficient of some of the younger women reached levels rarely seen in modern medical literature. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery was the documentation found in the main house. In a locked office, investigators found dozens of notebooks where Jeremiah had meticulously documented his observations throughout decades. These notebooks revealed the patriarch was aware of the genetic risks but saw them as a necessary process of purification. "The first generations will suffer so that the future can transcend," he wrote in a 1992 entry. The morning of October 21, 1997, marked the beginning of a new life for the 7 Blackwood barn women. They were transferred to a specialized facility in Portland, where a multidisciplinary team began what would become one of the most complex rehabilitation processes ever documented in the United States. The cold destination of Jeremiah and Joseph Blackwood followed its parallel course. Both were arrested on the day of the barn's discovery. In September 1998, after a 3-week trial that attracted national attention, Jeremiah was sentenced to 6 consecutive life imprisonment terms with no possibility of parole. Joseph, for whom prosecutors argued he acted under the psychological coercion of his older brother, received a 45-year sentence. For the 7 women, the reintegration process was long and complex. The special program developed for them by the University of Oregon, later known as the Blackwood Protocol, became a model for extreme cases involving victims of prolonged isolation. The impact of the Blackwood case extended far beyond the fate of those directly involved. In 2003, the United States Congress approved the SARA law, establishing new protocols for monitoring children in home education in isolated rural areas. In the scientific community, the anonymous medical data collected from the Blackwood women contributed significantly to the understanding of severe consanguinity's effects on humans. In 2015, 18 years after the rescue, the Blackwood property was finally demolished by the state of Oregon. A small memorial was established where the barn once stood, a simple bronze plate with words honoring the resilience of the human spirit in the face of extreme cruelty. Of the 7 women rescued, 5 eventually managed to establish independent lives, though with varying degrees of need for continuous support. Sarah, the oldest, became a respected activist for the rights of abuse victims and a symbol of resilience. If you watched so far, it is because you liked this story, the narration concludes. Leave a comment saying I watched here so I can meet you and know who really follows the channel. Do not forget to subscribe to know more real cases like this. Give your like to support our investigative work and share this impactful story with people who value documentaries that reveal the most obscure realities of the human condition.